My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasangran, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm covering an important philosophy, which is His Holiness G.P. Mahan's I God philosophy. This concept, which I'm going to cover today, is the concept of God. There are two parts to this concept. I'm going to cover the first part of God, Swamiji's definition and characterization of God. Swamiji, in his treatise, which he wrote, a very important treatise called I God, his experience of this God realization straight after acquiring this Kundalini meditation and refining the Kundalini meditation, and through this Kundalini meditation he was able to acquire blissful and amazing, enlightening experiences. And through this practice and through this introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation, and this intensive tapas, he documented his experiences and his understanding of God, this universe, the self, and the entire creation process. And he documents this in this I God book. And today we are going to cover this concept of God. Swamiji starts off the book with this important quote where he says that there is nothing except God. It cannot be assumed or asserted that God took some other substance and created everything out of it. He then goes on to say that everything is an expansion, manifestation, and evolution of God. What does he mean here? And I'm going to break down this quote, step by step to give greater clarity on what Swamiji is trying to convey. What he's saying here in the first part of this quote is that he says there's nothing except God. He says without God, nothing exists. So existence itself, he defines as God, a very important axiom that he characterizes this idea of God. Then he goes on to explain that, while nothing exists because of God, God itself did not take any substance. He says that everything was created out of God, but God itself is not, created by anything. He says that everything exists, he says, because of God, created by God. So everything that we know, everything that we cognize, everything that we see and breathe and hear and everything is a creation of God. Our entire universe is a creation of God. Then he goes on to explain that everything is an expansion, manifestation, and evolution of God. What he's saying here is that everything is God in different forms. And I will explain that a little bit more detail on how he sees this God substratum, which is non-creatable, it cannot be created, can create everything. And there are multitude forms of God that is created from the substratum. What does that mean? It means that, everything that we know is part and parcel of God and manifestation of God. But God itself cannot be created. So in the process of trying to understand this concept, four questions emerge for me. He says, that which was created. What was created? He talks about everything being created. What is that was created? The second question I had was that which is creation and the creator. And he says it's not created. What is that? Why is that the case? So naturally it leads to the next question, is that if God created everything, who created God? And this is a common question that most people have, most seekers have. And finally, if God cannot be created, how come? We need to know why God cannot be created. There must be something that prevents that creation as we know it, and we need to really understand that. So let's break down this quote with these four questions. So that which was created, he says that everything in our universe was created. Energy, matter, nebulas, stars, solar systems, planets, all the insentient beings, non-biological beings, and also biological beings. Everything that we know was created. by this substratum. This is what the first part he explains. So our material body, which is part and parcel of this universe, is also created by the building blocks of this universe, or what we call God, because universe was created by God. At least this axiom, makes that case. Then we go on to the second question, that which is creation and creator. So now let's define what this creator and the creation process. Let's call the creator as God. What does that mean? It means that this creation has a process, that gives rise to things that we know in this material universe. So a simple way is that it creates, there's a genesis of something emerging. So a generator. It also operates, or what we call sustains things for a while. And after that, we see that in our universe, it dissolves and it breaks down and it goes back and recreates again. So this process repeats over and over again. And we see that every day. We see that in our universe every day. We see stars, form, sustain for a while, and then they dissolve. And the same thing we see in our own biology. So this process that is inbuilt in our universe is part of the creation process. So the question then is that, a supplementary question is that, this creation process, why did the creation process take place? I'm not going to answer that in this lecture, but I'll cover that in the next lecture, because it's got to touch on an important concept, Swamiji's own version of what quantum physics is. But I'll come back to that in part 2. But assume that everything is created by the creator, from the creator, by the creator and from the creator for now. So the fourth question then comes, which is the third question comes is that, if God created everything, who created God? And this is a very important question. This is a common question that most seers ask. So here, when we mean creation, we are stating a time-bound God. Creation means beginning, sustenance for a while, and dissolution. So we are now imprinting, when we ask, where did God come from? Who created God? We are bringing an important component of our own physiology and our own biology, which is time, which is an integral part of our universe. So now let me say that, suppose we remove time from the equation of God. What does that mean? Time is important in our universe. And this universe was created by God. So that means that God was there before time, the way time we know what time is. So if we remove time from that, then God would be timeless. What does that mean? It means eternal or transcendental. So it's neither created nor dies. So this is an important part. So which means that time is important in our universe, but may not be relevant for the God substratum that I'm talking about, or Mahan is talking about. So this is a very important point of timeless or eternal. So what we have is that we have two manifestations of God. One is the transcendental God, which is timeless, which Mahan calls it as Big I. But we also have a time-bound God, because everything from the beginning of our universe and everything that is created in the universe, time was embedded. So we have a time-bound God. Swamiji calls it a small I. So there's two distinctions of a transcendental God and time-bound God. And the natural question is that, if we are part of this universe and this universe was created by this God, that means we should be able to experience that time-bound God, given that time is key and core to our DNA. But the universe itself, the universe with time itself, was created by a substratum which is timeless. The question then is that, if that is the case, then our DNA must include that component too. And this is what a lot of seers start thinking in this logical way. Yes, we experience this time-bound God. The search now is that a transcendental, a timeless God, which predates our universe. And this is the search that many masters, including Mahan, took that journey. So the two manifestations, the transcendental God, transcendental to space and time, and we have the time-bound God, which manifests as everything in this space and time continuum, and it's caught up by the physics of the space and time in this four-dimensional universe. So then comes the notion, so we've defined two types of God, timeless and time-bound, right? But what are the key characteristics of this transcendental God? And the Advaitic philosophy covers this, and it's consistent and exactly the same as what Mahan's characterization of this transcendental God or the big I. So here he speaks about God is not part of the material body and mind. It is apart from the body and the mind, right? So it's different from the body and the mind. The second key part of this is that God can manifest as the body and the mind, as what Mahan says. God is, all the material forms are God in different forms. This is the second part. The third part is God is not part, but it pervades and illumines the body and the mind. So it powers everything, matter and energy, including our body and our mind. It enables it. And the fourth important characterization of God is not limited to the body and the mind. It exists beyond the body and beyond the mind. You see? So the question then is that we have to ask, in all this characterization, is the transcendental and also the time-bound God embedded in us? Here we are talking about the transcendental God. Can we experience this transcendentality? Are there moments in our lives that we experience this transcendentality? Right? And this is something that we want to keep in mind, and I'll come back to this discussion. And the fifth element is without the mind and the body, this God, transcendental God, is there, but cannot experience this limited material universe that is caught up by these forces of this, the physics of this universe. So we have this five characterization of this transcendental God. And Mahan, had this characterization. He started exploring this transcendental God, these qualities of God, and he was able to experience this. And I'm going to talk later about the experience of this transcendentality. So let me give you some examples of this form and the formless God. Let's look at our things that are already in our universe, right? Let's look at liquid gold. It doesn't take any shape, or it takes any shape that you put it in. So for simplicity, let's look at liquid gold. It's got no form. What's interesting is that if you put it in a mold, and you cool it down, it takes form, right? It takes in the form of a ring, we call it gold ring. We take in the form of a gold chain and bangles. But what is really interesting is that this liquid, this fluid, which is kind of, flexible and formless, when you put it in a mold and you go through a series of process, you're able to get form in the form of gold ring, gold chain, bangles. While the form is there, looks different, the substance is still the same. Now, the same parallel, we see that in our own reality, right? So we see that different molds will have different laws of physics and gives us different, forms, and the different forms have different functions. Right? So this process repeats itself over and over again in our universe. So let's look at humans. Of course, there are a lot of other biological species, but let's look at we human, the Homo sapiens, right? The thinking man. The principle says that, everything emerged from this formless, transcendental God. Let's characterize this as this picture here. There's nothing there, right, except, dark and black space, right? Now, in that same process, how our universe was created, there was a mold that was there. The natural question, why was the mold there? And I think that's a very important question, which I'll come back to. And we know that that mold created this primordial atom. This is the seed of our universe. And we see that seed imprinted in many, many, in our universe, the birth of our universe, birth of nebulas, birth of galaxies. We see that in the birth of even biological beings, including humans. We see that it starts off as a primordial atom and a process of fusion and fission that takes place. And we see that our entire universe emerged from that primordial. If you see, even in terms of human life, it starts off with a dot, and then there's a fusion that takes place. And in that fusion, you have the process of meiosis and mitosis takes place, and you start seeing replication, and you see hands and legs and everything starts forming. The same thing also with our thought. We start off with one dot of a thought, and then it expands. So this nature of our universe, with its laws of physics, is replicated over and over again. So we see that formulas taking on this primordial atom and emerging to become the entire universe with a multitude of galaxies, nebulas, and so on, all in this four-dimensional universe with its own laws of physics. From there, we had Earth and all the biological species, and one of the species is us. Four-dimensional, three-dimensional body with time built in, and it's got its own dynamics, its own physics. And I want to, speak a little bit more of that. I'll come back to that. I want to take another important, component from our universe. Let's look at light. This is a very nice picture of Isaac Newton that is doing a light experiment. He shows how the sunlight beam through a prism gives awesome, beautiful colors. The white light, when it passes through a prism, gives you beautiful colors. From a white light, 7 spectrums emerge, right? There's a process. The physics tells us that, light goes through a refraction and dispersion, that it moves, transition from, white light to 7 spectrums. Again, the physics of this material universe and the prism gives rise to this. Now let's come back to the human life. We start off with this, showed you the birth of the universe, and now we are going to speak about the human life in that same imprint, the formless to the form. That's the formless, that's the transcendental God that, embodies this humans, this Homo sapiens, this big I that is the source of everything, the substratum that is dimensionless, formless. And that component is at the core of the human being, core of humans. But what's really interesting is that we see that our universe imprints, its own forces. And I'm going to characterize that as the white space, right? So within that infinite, or within that formless substratum, we see that our universe was created with its own laws of physics, in a 4-dimensional, with time built in. And we are part of that. But at the core of our DNA, the transcendentality is there, although we are now embodied by our material universe. What's really interesting is that that material universe that we have goes through this process of refraction and dispersion, like a prism that you saw earlier, with its own physics. And we see that while this transcendental God is formless, dimensionless, colorless, in its full potential, when it's captured in this material universe, we see that the laws of material universe takes shape, and we see that the beautiful colors of life emerges. And in the same way as how the prism disperses light, in that same way we see that the dispersion of this universal transcendental God that makes its way into this four-dimensional material universe will have that colorful and dynamism as our prism would. So we see that because this transcendental light is passing through this material universe with its laws of physics, part of the laws of physics is time, where you have birth, sustenance for and dissolution for a short while. That light or that transcendentality will also emanate that cycle of life of birth, and that by the core, that transcendentality is still there. The forms change, the formless is still there. And this is what Swamiji shows, that God as a substratum is everywhere. It creates everything, it manifests as everything, and is also part of that change that the human body and the human consciousness and everything in this universe goes through. Everything is a manifestation, evolution, and expansion of this substratum. So what we see here is that in the core of our DNA, what I call divine nectar of awareness, we see that we have both the transcendental, timeless God, the big I, and the time-bound God, which is the small I, that Swamiji speaks about. So what we see here is that though our body is mortal, caught up by the physics of this material universe, we are anointed with this immortality, which is the physics of the substratum, which is dimensionless, formless, that is not touched by this material universe, creator of this material universe. Though our body is perishable, this is the physics of this material universe, we are anointed with this imperishability. We are not caught up by this time, so there's neither birth nor death. Similarly, though our body is finite, we are anointed by the infiniteness of this substratum, which Swamiji calls as God. And finally, though our body is time-bound, because it's time-bound, it's caught by cause and effect, we are transcendental. We here means that substratum that is core to our DNA is transcendental to cause and effect, the laws of karma. So we, in our core of our being, we've got both the time-bound God and the transcendental God. So what this concept that Swamiji brings out is that if God is core to my DNA, that means I've got both the time-bound and timeless God. My life should be divine. It should be inspirational. It should be awesome, right? And because we are God, we're the formless God, but taking on different forms. The formless God with infinite potentiality and possibilities. And can you imagine having that, the mind that is aware of it, is wedded to it, and welded to this idea of this transcendentality, the mind will become transcendental. It will live in inspirational and enlightened life. This is the essence of Mahan's teachings, which he shows and he explains that through meditation, we have this formed, dynamic, body and being that continuously changes and transforms. But deep down, there is a transcendentality in all of us, which is unchanging. And that should be the foundation that the mind should leverage on to achieve that everlasting, eternal, enlightened experience. With that, Sandosham. Thank you.